Hey, what's up everyone? So this is going to be the 76 opening that I'd like to share with you, which is the Rose-v-Toth opening. So I think this opening is typically variated or initiated by white. And I think the interesting thing about this opening is that it was first kind of observed by myself at least that it was really well played by the reigning world champion, Mr. Akihiro Takahashi from Japan, and also the double world champion, Mr. Ben Seeley from the United States of America. So, yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into the sequence. It's essentially like a standard diagonal sequence that leads into almost a cow and then towards a tail towards a sailboat perhaps. So typically G5 is essentially the sailboat opening or leading up to sailboat or Tanida. So over here, instead of playing G5, after Black has jumped into D3 and made the standard cut to the book, you actually play the F4 move over here. So this shape is kind of interesting. It's more compact than the sailboat. The sailboat is kind of more dispersive. This one is more compact, more into the center box. So interestingly, it might surprise opponent because it's less common than the sailboat, and at the same time it's more compact. People may not be as trained for this. So for Black, it might limit the options. Typically, you see Black playing E2, which is the standard book sequence. I think the next popular move would be F2 followed by F3. I think I almost don't see people playing G5 or D7 against this opening. But essentially, I would say that it's counterintuitive for Black, but also at the same time, there's a reduced advantage when you play this opening. It might actually be a perfect draw opening, but the chances are, based on the evaluation, is that you might actually see a slight disadvantage. So, and it's also difficult to follow up. I think even for my own experience, maybe because I'm not that much trained towards the diagonal opening and more so towards this sequence, it's also because, I realized that the follow up is typically hard. So Black goes in, White for you, the next best move is actually to flip 3 discs into the center. This is still fairly achievable. Black jumps onto the side, and then White, over here, it is hard to kind of decide that, B5 is a better move compared to, say, B6 perhaps, mainly because, both flips 1 disc. At the same time, you're also keeping to your side. At the same time, you might be tempted to look at C2, maybe even F2, which is fairly dispersive. So over here, I would say that B5 is kind of hard to kind of give a solid rationale. If White would have played B6, Black jumps in, then it gives Black a very nice opportunity to regroup back to F3. So perhaps that's kind of the difference. And if you were to play B5 and Black were to just jump into C6 at the same time to try to target F3, I think the existence of the B5 disc actually allows you to kind of do a diagonal cutback to remove the C6 disc that gives access for Black to jump into F3. So if Black were to jump in to chase after the access, White could still defend it with this move to B6. And then you would see that this mini diagonal is still being controlled by White, and it doesn't allow Black to kind of jump in. So if Black would have kind of forced his way through, it seems like you have one more option to go, just cut through to B3 over here to jump into F2. So that's potentially the rationale behind it. Why B5 would be potentially better than B6. Because if you play B6, you don't really have that opportunity to kind of cut back and remove the C6 disc. So over here, the typical response by Black is to play B6 followed by White, leaving a 1 square gap. Instead of jumping right into the center, you want to jump B3, and then over here, it's fairly counterintuitive for Black to kind of do this cut. But in fact, this mid game kind of staircase or ladder shape is quite common in the mid game, where you have pockets of squares in between this ladder. It's the best move for any color to kind of form this ladder shape, in a sense that if White were to go to C6, Black can go to B4 typically, and if White were to go to B4, Black can go to C6, so, and vice versa. So essentially, this is kind of like creating a mid-game parity zone whereby you give your opponent 2 options, and if your opponent takes one of those options, you can take the other. So again, this would be another move that seems counterintuitive offhand for White, so it's difficult to kind of follow up. for this opening when you're initiating it as white. Typically, you might be tempted to jump into b4, but b4 gives an easy c6 regrouping for black and allows black to kind of continue to access, create that c6 disk to access the f3 square, which we wanted to avoid to begin with. So maybe white jumping into d2, and then this gives black a few options. Black could play f3 almost immediately to try to kind of come back to regroup to c6, and essentially it's easier to follow up for white right now to just jump in. So black could go in here, but that creates a white opportunity to play to the diagonal, or even to play over here to regroup into the center. So these are two possible options. If black were to play this move, white would then still continue to play to the diagonal, chip off over to the edge, and leave this more as a mid-game parity. If black were to jump in, white would have that future opportunity to jump into b4. So over here it seems like it's suggesting that it's not the best move to immediately pounce, but rather to eliminate one tempo to avoid black from capturing this fairly quiet move to g4 first. So essentially that's the Rose-v-Toth opening. I would say it's fairly difficult in general compared to the other openings to play as white to kind of play it out. But yeah, go ahead and take a look. There could be a reason why Mr. Ben Seeley, a double world champion, and also Mr. Akihiro Takahashi, the reigning world champion from 2019, is kind of inclined towards this opening. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.